Hi there, my name is Daniella Bloom, and welcome to the first episode of America's Voices. We are bringing Americans together from across the political spectrum to discuss issues and topics that matter to us all. It's time to go underneath the headlines.
Form, this has the potential to be pretty awesome. I don't see any other networks, any other outlets really bringing regular people who care together to actually have a dialogue. So we're not perpetuating echo chambers. And reminding us all that we are humans, we are Americans first, before our political affiliations. And when we can understand better what matters to us, it doesn't become so divisive. So this is my attempt. Thank you. This is my attempt to be a part of the solution and not perpetuate the problem. For those of you who don't know, my background as a psychotherapist, as Ellie's premier relationship authority, dating expert, marriage saver, divorce success coach. I've seen it all, and I've seen what makes and breaks relationships today, and the same can be said in our politics. There's so much parallels with the blame, the gaslighting, the double standards, if only you would change. I mean, so much, so much. So my hope for today, first of all, I really welcome your feedback. I want to know what you guys want, what would be great for you guys in a call like this. Right now, it's starting to grow. The word is getting out. I'm not quite sure how many people are joined today, if they got the link. There's still a lot of technical glitches we're fixing. But my hope is that every week we have different topics, and we have a panel of returning guests. But then we have other people coming who maybe are actually in the world of environment, in the world of education, in the world of law. And they can help propel our discussion, and people can come and just listen, or they can be a part of the conversation. So it will be mainly carried by like 4 to 6 people. And then at the end, it will be open for questions. So we're going to try that format right now, since we are about 6 people. I know there's a bunch of people who want to join later. We'll see if they come. But right now, it works out because we're pretty even. We have independents, we have libertarians, we have Republicans, we have Democrats. So let's start somewhere, right? So I introduced myself, and we can just, since we're a smaller group, can we just go around and just do a brief introduction, so we all know where we're coming from? And if you're comfortable sharing what your political affiliation is, you can do just that. So who would like to go first? Imad, I'm so glad you volunteered. Okay.
Well, I'm independent.
Okay.
And every time I tested my political views, I came very close to the center, regardless of how much I liked Republican views or Democratic views. I always came, have you ever done the test have you ever done that? The political?
No, is there a test to determine?
There is a test, yeah.
Oh,
and I almost inevitably fell right in the center.
Okay.
Every time I've done it. And I'm 60 years old. And I was in the center when I was 25 years old. That's funny. Wow. I'm a filmmaker and also an investor in many other businesses. So I'm a gun owner. I'm an advocate of First Amendment, Second Amendment, 14th Amendment.
Okay.
I'm also a constitutionalist.
Okay.
And I'd like today that before we depart, that we agree on one set of facts by which the history of the United States was built on. If we could agree who won the Civil War today, just agree on that today, and agree that when the Civil War was won, the after effects of that Civil War were never implemented. Lincoln was assassinated, Johnson came, Reconstruction never happened, and Ku Klux Klan came in. I mean, the rest of history, I'm sure you all know it, but we need to agree on a set of facts. So when we look forward, we know what we're talking about. We know that we're not talking about a muddy history. We're talking about clear, black and white, clear cut. This is what happened, and this is how it ended, and this is why the civil rights took this turn, and the white supremacists took this turn, and we need to agree on that at the very least.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I was thinking of dealing with more contemporary headlines, but you bring up a very good point, because a lot of the divide today comes from how we interpreted how we got here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I could not have agreed with you more. Today, when you watch Fox News, there is a program called Outnumbered. Do you know why it's called Outnumbered, guys? Outnumbered. It's called Outnumbered because Robert E. Lee, after he signed the unconditional surrender, he told Ulysses S. Grant, we would have won the war, but we were outnumbered. That sentence carried to this day to show that the South did not lose the war in their head. They did not lose the war. They were simply outnumbered. So in 2021, to have a Fox News program on television called Outnumbered, it's outrageous. And it's in your face, but nobody says where it's coming from. Nobody says what's outnumbered coming from.
Okay, so this is a very important topic for you. Yeah. We have noted that. So before we get into it, I just want to make sure we welcome everyone else to the call.
Yes.
And Imad was very passionate about saying what is important to him. You don't have to necessarily state what's important to you. It's how you want to make of your minute. So who would like to go next?
Okay.
David? Oh, did someone raise their hand?
David, yes.
I muted and unmuted myself at the same moment.
Okay.
So I, like Imad, I like to think of myself as an independent, but I'm not. So I like to think that I'm practical and assuming, but there's no doubt I'm much farther on the left than a true Democrat through. I don't think I'm not on the far progressive or what would be called the radical left. So I'm not there. I'm more radical. And I really try to look at things as a more pragmatic approach. And the thing that really drives me more nutty and really my crusade painfully is I feel like it's whack-a-mole of fact, of conspiracy of theory, and more than that, I really just tend to showcase more hypocrisy because both sides are fighting the same parallel thing using the same techniques. And if you just say, hey, you're arguing about this, but it's happening, both sides are doing the same thing. And I just find it really hypocritical when one side slams the other and you go, what about the exact same thing over there? And so to me, it's always just, I often go with the Mark Twain line, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And you see people making the same arguments now that they did. I mean, Imad, you have that story, but these stories repeat, people flip the sides, and the same battles are being fought with just a slightly different language.
Yeah, I found that, to every defense is an offense, to every offense there's eventually a defense, and nothing really, if the energy is just spent throwing back and forth, then the real issues at hand don't really get addressed because there's no room for the coming together. There's no room for the moderate voice.
No, I mean, right. As the political parties shifted sides, they could just swap their papers. And now whoever's the minorities about fiscal responsibility, whoever, you just flip the papers and the arguments go to on the power struggle opposed to on the policy.
Yeah. But, we are in times that there are now huge outcomes and consequences of this. Our nation, Biden did not win the majority. So half the country does not agree with it. Okay, so I saw your face. The election, what I mean is he didn't win by a landslide. Okay, there's half the country does not feel united under Biden when there's no acknowledgement of why we're not there.
I will say I'll say that's convenient to say, and not necessarily. If you take a look at most elections, they're usually within that. A landslide is in these numbers. I think people like to think that there's a greater span between when Reagan won, but it's usually within these percentages, and the landslide and not a landslide.
I think our last few elections, I know that the Bush Gore election was very close as well. Right. I think Obama had more of a lead.
No.
I don't know the numbers, but
as far as electoral college, this is as good as it gets. The last 40 years, electoral college was within this range.
And I don't think the popular vote's been this wide.
No, actually, this is the most people that ever voted in United States elections. Ever.
Yeah, well, exactly. So a lot of people came out from both sides.
Are we going to go by electoral college, or are we going to go by popular vote?
Yeah, well, all I'm saying is there's a huge portion of our country who feels very separate from the other half, and so to pretend that doesn't exist doesn't help the solution.
No.
So, and to vilify and categorize doesn't help the solution. So I don't want to get stuck on that. David, thank you so much for sharing.
I will say it's not the margin of the difference, it's the polarity of the difference.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. Mark or Marcy, who would like to go next?
Ladies first.
Oh, Mark, I'm sorry. Mark?
Ladies can go first.
Oh, ladies can go first. Marcy, are you ready to share?
I'm ready.
Okay.
My engineer Jim is with me.
Hi.
Yay! We get Jim and Marcy. Okay.
So from my perspective, I'm very much a constitutionalist. I agree with that. The other piece of it, I heard Dr. Dave Janda say one time, which I totally agree with. He said that sort of the left leaning and the right leaning, whether it's Democrat or Republican, is really a horizontal axis, and that it's the same bird, left and right wing, and that the real truth is in the vertical axis, which is from freedom to total, non-freedom in your life and in your way of living. So communism to, whatever you're going to, socialism to, more of a freedom stance. And the interesting thing that I've learned, that I've seen, is that when you're talking about polarity, which is a couple people have kind of mentioned it in different forums, what I feel that they really try to do is they try to engender this sort of fight between that right and left wing, when we're really not paying attention to the vertical axis, which is what we really need to be looking at, that freedom versus non-freedom. And that's where the truth lies, and that's really where our efforts probably need to be focused in more of a stance of more of a constitutional perspective and more in freedom. So from my perspective, I was brought up very Republican. My father was active in the Republican Party. I had relatives that were active in the Republican Party. They were delegates during the Reagan era. I'm probably, it's really funny. If JFK ran today, I totally would have voted for him. If he had been alive, he would be my man. So, I just, I'm not a Republican. I'm disenfranchised by what I see in both parties. So I guess I'm an independent. Jim?
Awesome.
Good for
So
you.
glad you're here. Jim, yes.
Oh, so I'd have to say I probably lean more conservative in where I am with kind of policies and where I feel the government should be involved. Maybe that would lean a little more libertarian, but not with libertarian that I'm seeing emerging mainstream, but at the core essence of it. But I find the same problem with both parties. So I find it hard to align and say I'm a Republican because I don't agree with a lot of what goes on necessarily in the party. I think that there's corruption on either side and mismanagement. I'm for small government, get out of people's lives and help people where people need to be helped. But very much believe in free market capitalism and letting people make the best decisions for their own life. I think that people, given the opportunity and the resources, know what's best for themselves, and the government shouldn't be involved in our day-to-day life, and let us make those decisions for ourselves.
Okay, awesome. Okay, and now we have Mark.
Okay, so I started life as a full-blown Republican after undergraduate school, but I found myself over the years becoming a fiscal Republican, but a social Democrat, which I guess kind of pushes me into the middle.
Sure.
I spent 45 years in the cable television industry. For those of you on Cox Cable in Virginia Beach in Northern Virginia, I would like to thank you because I supplied all the equipment for those projects.
Oh, very cool. I remember Cox. I still have their number on my phone. Yes.
I have it here in Las Vegas too.
Yes.
I sold my company, multinational company, a few years ago, kind of retired. Now I work for my wife, which I think all husbands do. I'm sorry. What else can I tell you? Big supporter of the First and Second Amendments, actually all the amendments, Constitution. I truly believe that we are in a very sad time, but I have to correct one thing the gentleman said. Outnumbered did not get its name having to do with any political association. It got its name from the fact that there was originally 4 women and 1 man. Outnumbered. That's how it originally got its name. Just so you're clear, it was never a political body.
Fox? The program on Fox, are you referring to, or the word outnumbered, period?
No, the show on Fox was 4 women, 1 man. One lucky guy is what it was originally advertised as. You can look it up. I didn't. You know.
No, I agree. But why would that name be the same name as Robert E. Lee's final word?
It could be the same thing as Custer's Last Stand. He was outnumbered a bit too. But that was the original meaning of where the name came from. That's all. I don't believe in revising the Constitution. I believe we happen to be fairly Orthodox Jews, and we don't change the Torah, and so we don't change the Constitution in our eyes. It's the same thing. What else can I tell you about me? I was a professional musician, lived in Greenwich Village, was born and raised in New York City, Syracuse graduate degrees, just finished my doctoral dissertation. And now I don't really do much. I work for my wife. She has a company that manufactures wigs and hair extensions, and we employ a bunch of people. We are a B corporation, which is a socially responsible corporation, because we believe in giving back to the planet. And that's about it.
Okay, well, I love the range of backgrounds we have, but we seem to have a lot of common. I think we're all in the tribe. Are we all in the tribe? Yes? Okay. So it's ironic that today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, because it seems like both sides are calling each other like the Holocaust deniers, which is really ironic. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say, I never got to share what my political affiliation is. I was pretty much always center-left leaning, very pro-Israel, raised with an Israeli background. But since I moved back to Los Angeles in 2016, I started to become center-right. And mainly because I saw what was happening with the BLM movement in 2016. And as a psychotherapist and as a coach, you know, and being a big pro-Israel advocate, one of the issues that's very sensitive to me is empowered victimhood. You can't really move forward with that because that mentality there's no compromising with. And so that is kind of, for me, what kind of pushed me towards the patriotic movement of what Trump has come to be known for was the shift in May, when I saw our cities being burned, the looting, the destruction of businesses, and no one was really calling it out, that this country is it has its flaws and it can continue to improve, but we are so lucky to be in it. Many of our families have come from countries where religion was not allowed. My family was kicked out of Iraq with just the clothes on their back. My dad came to America with nothing, maybe $100 come in his pocket, and he's a self-made man, and it was not easy. So, and I think coming to the rallies and being around other people who actually love our country, who back the blue, all diversities, all races, all genders, all LGBT, Asians, Black, Arabs, coming together for a sense of we love this country, you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater, is what really resonated with me. But just like Mark, I'm more socially liberal. I believe in first-term abortion. I'm actually not into guns. I understand, though, that the Second Amendment right. I feel a little bit more liberal on immigration. So I also would say I'm more center. I'm center right leaning, but I've always been center throughout my life. And this is where we're at. Okay, so we touched upon different things. My first plan was to ask about, there's so much that happened this week with the 30 executive orders. Can I get some feedback from the group? Should we take upon Imad's request and start from the beginning? What do we think? So do you guys want to put something in the chat, or just, actually, we're just a small group, just call it out?
I think let's even go farther back than Imad, because I think an interesting topic is the 1619 project versus the 1776 topic that just came out this month. I mean, there were two competing philosophies that kind of came out, one through the New York Times, and then the commission that came out and instantly went out and instantly got dropped rather quickly, because it came out right as the administrations were changing. But they're pretty much get to the core differences, I feel, about looking back at history and really going to BLM and going to the movements.
Well, I mean, I think that's a huge thing to take on.
Fair enough.
I think that's a lot to unpack, and
I was going to go with meaning of life, but I just scaled back a little.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's a big thing, and I think we probably, I would like to be more prepared for that debate. I'd like to be able to.
That's good. And I was going to say, it'd be good if somebody actually knew it a lot better than me. I just know.
Yeah, yeah, and and who knows? Maybe we can get someone who's like very proficient from one perspective to the next, and they can both come, and as we can contribute. What else? What do you guys all think? What else do you guys think?
Actually, I have a small, just a question. Imad's kids are pretty close to my kids' ages. And just a small thing on, were your kids taught the 1619? Or did they go through it through their schooling?
We went through schooling,
yeah.
And now that they moved to Valencia, the William S. Hart School District is slightly different than LUSD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's very threatening for a lot of us. Yeah.
Right, right.
The reason why I wanted to start from like a point of an anchor, make the Civil War as the anchor point, because a lot of what Trumpism had done based on words that just don't mean much to us, the modern Americans, but just brought out the worst in people. To say that a monument stood there, it's our Southern heritage, and the monument stood there, we should not take it down, and all of that good stuff, and then Jews will not replace us, and all of that stuff that happened, Charlottesville and other places. We should not be arguing about whether these monuments should stand up. Can you imagine, gentlemen and ladies, you drive in Berlin on an Adolf Hitler highway. It's unimaginable. You drive in Fredericksburg, Virginia today, and it's Jefferson Davis Highway, the president of the Confederacy being celebrated. It, like, to say that that is Southern heritage is betrayal to the people that died in the Civil War, is betrayal to where we stand as Unionists, betrayal to all of us as Americans who believe in the United States, that flag. So to say that the Confederate flag is a First Amendment is absolutely hogwash. There is no First Amendment about a swastika. The swastika and the Confederate flag are equal. There is no confusion about that.
Hey, Matt, I want to chime in just for a quick second, and I will say I didn't pay as good attention as I should have, but what I found interesting, and since we're all the tribe members, it was the Yom Kippur sermon, I think, from our rabbi in LA. We're actually in Washington, but we zoomed down in LA. And it was about that very thought. And the one pivotal thought that I think about it when I think of slavery was, for Jews, our slavery story is what we build ourselves on.
Right.
Passover. I mean, it is our slavery story. I mean, that is the history of Judaism.
Right.
And to give that to, and so, I mean, when you look at Black America and their slavery story, how do we not give it that same power? That, I mean, we have, with a mighty hand is still our calling. I mean, and the outstretched arm. It was an interesting parallel that I never really thought of, that our slave story as being the root to Judaism.
Okay, thank you.
But the thing that the thing that troubles me about that is that I have a very dear friend, and she's Black. We had a very serious conversation and very honest conversation. And I told her that I was voting for Trump, and she was like, "How can you vote for him? He's a racist." And we had a lot of dialogue around it. And so we talked about policies and whatever. And so at the end of the conversation, she says, "Wow," she goes, "I can understand why you would vote for him." And I said, "Yes." I said, "But, for me, what troubles me is that, and what scares me for you is that part of the rhetoric that's being pushed and being perpetuated is that somehow if you're Black, African American, whatever the term is, she calls herself Black. She says, "I'm not from Africa." So she says that just the fact that there is racism, and it's like a highlighted thing, and it's almost like perpetuated and thrown to the narrative to say, "Oh, this is true," when it's really not true. Honestly, am I going to say that there are people out there that are racist? Yes, they are. Are there people out there that hate Jews, that hate me because I'm Jewish? Yes, they do. But the majority of people don't. So why do you focus this highlight on people that do and make it something that it's not? It's really about divisiveness. It's about dividing you by race. And it's about trying to generate this whole divide that's really not true. And at the end of the conversation, she was literally shaking. She was like crying and shaking. She goes, "Oh my God," she goes, "nobody's ever talked to me like this." She said, thank you. And I was just blown away at how sensitive and how sensitized. It's almost like, I feel like it's almost like a racial trauma. There's like this trauma that's been inflicted, not just by the slavery that happened in past generations, but also just ongoing and the concurrent kind of push to sort of push someone down and to also push this narrative into their into their mindset that this is true and to push it into our society. I hate that.
Yeah.
Well, you have to remember the Democratic Party for years pushed themselves as the party for the minorities, the blacks, and they've forced into a hatred or at least a dislike for Republicans in general over the years. It's only recently that we've seen that change, and now it's going back the other way. When you take a movement like Black Lives Matter and you say you want to destroy the nuclear family and you want reparations for slavery, heck, I want reparations for slavery, okay? We got to change the rhetoric, and the media is the most to blame. Yeah. And that started in around the 1980s, early 80s, when news was no longer a nonprofit center. It became a profit center.
Yeah, and it started to cater to audiences.
And it catered to sensationalism, gets me audiences, audiences get me advertisers, advertisers get me money. The more sensational, the better. You know, and I can just say this in a non-political fashion. If a plane crashes, and I'm sorry that it happens, they don't get the number right. You have 5 different stations reporting the plane crash with different numbers. There's no apology because somebody wants to be first so badly, they don't really care. First is better. Accuracy doesn't matter. And that's what's happened to the news over the last 40 years.
That's absolutely true.
I'll also add that, and it's funny, I remember meeting Dave Halberstam in, I think, the 80s, who wrote a good book about that. But it's also, I think we have a beautiful vision of an independent press when it's mostly been partisan through American history.
Correct.
And we kind of grew up in the bubble of it being independent, when that was really just a weird, blurry time.
There is a book out there, it's been out there for a year. It's called Why Are We Polarized by Ezra Klein. It's a must read. It explains everything we all been talking about, except it's got its own proof.
Yeah.
Like we are talking about how the media is not media anymore. It's not news. It's agenda driven.
Yes.
Agenda driven.
All of us can agree to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and because of that, and the echo chambers, and how we only talk to the people that think or look or do what we do, we are all living in our own little bubbles. We are so polarized. So Ezra Klein, amazing book called Why Are We Polarized? But then what I'd like to go back to is to try to find an agreement that, first of all, does anybody studied Reconstruction, the 10 years after the Civil War? Do you know what that is? And anybody?
Took a graduate course in it a long time ago.
That's it, right? So I highly recommend then. We're not gonna then go into it. I highly recommend before we meet again that we all go do our own research on Reconstruction. Slavery for Blacks is different than slavery for Jews, because as soon as Reconstruction was decapitated and white supremacists took over, they changed the rules and made something called Black Code laws. And it became illegal to walk down the street while Black. You have to have a contract to work for a white man. And if you didn't have one, you go to prison And when you go to prison, you go on a lease to work from the prison into a farmland. You became a slave again. So guess what? This happens to this day. To this day. You are a least black person as a slave when you go and get incarcerated. Every black man I met in Virginia was incarcerated, without exception. The film that I'm producing right now is called Between Forever. It's an all African-American cast. Almost everybody on the film that's a male has a record. That's not an accident.
So
That is not an accident.
I've lived in Virginia for over 20 years, and I know several black men that don't have a record and haven't been to jail and are business owners.
Oh, it's great.
I also know a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot that don't have a record.
Yes, and
Don't
many
have a
of
record.
my black friends today have no records and are very anti-BLM.
Yes.
So I think making a statement of, I think general statements that all Americans or all black people, I don't think is helpful, because I think people have different experiences and they know different people.
What I would like to say, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think what's interesting though, if we look at it systematically, and everybody that's saying systematic, we have this systematic racism, and the people that are saying this have been the people that are in office and have been in these positions for 40 plus years that could have done something about it.
They didn't, and they didn't.
And all of a sudden now it's a problem that they're going to solve. I have a hard time believing that.
I think we're in a much worse situation than we were
Yes.
30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Way more divided, way more animosity. I think racism, in fact, has increased because of it.
Is it a race problem or is it a class problem?
Yeah, I think those things get interchanged and confused all the time.
Yes, they do. But
Yeah.
there is a lot of what I would say, we're talking about people. The people that we associate with probably didn't go to jail, whether they were white or black or Asian or Hispanic.
That's true.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
If we lived in the plantation of this generation, which is the inner cities, I would say, and we grew up there, we probably would know plenty of people who were incarcerated, had drug addiction problems, gang members. I don't think I know one of my friends who's been in a gang, white, black, or Hispanic.
Good point.
So I believe that we're not in a race war, we're in a class war.
Yes, it's a financial, it's an economic stratus difference. I don't think it's necessarily I hear this word, the term, the white privilege thing thrown around. It's about money. It's about financial privilege.
It's money and power, baby.
Yeah.
Because
And I feel,
look, my background and I'm a blue collar factory worker kid. Grew up in the city with a factory worker dad, public school, public education, and there are African Americans and Hispanic people that their parents were educated, college professors. They've had more privilege and more advantages than anything I've had in my life. So I really feel it's more about your economic status
Yes.
than it is necessarily about the color of your skin. Because I don't think you can go to Appalachia, where I've been involved with medical missions where people only get to see a dentist once a year if there's a free clinic, and tell them that they have white privilege.
Right.
Yeah, and something I wanted to say earlier to the point of the media dividing, when George Floyd was killed, there was a chance for unity. I mean, I think most all of us would agree that we can get behind mass incarceration reform. We can get behind having more mental health services for the police to utilize. But the term defunding the police and villainizing them when the statistics don't match up and empower people who are already prone to be angry, has this, it takes us even further from help and uniting on what we all want for every American. We want every American to succeed, because when we are all better as a country when everyone can contribute.
The term defund the police is a misnomer, because
But why was it chosen?
when it was originally brought up, it was not about decapitating the cops. It was about having a specialty kind of cop that shows up at a specialty kind of event. So a no-gun cop will show up at a domestic dispute. A psychological cop will show up at a domestic dispute, and so on. It was not about
Well, that, first of all, that's silly.
no, but that's what
At a domestic.
you could research it.
No, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying it's silly, and it's a silly word. It's like, I agree. It's the wrong representation.
But that's
Yeah.
the original.
Right. I mean,
the police was about that. It was about showing up at a homeless encampment. with
Right.
people-
But what happened, Iman, as you saw,
Yeah.
and the riots in LA, it was fuck the police, ACAB, whatever that stands for, and the police became vilified. And so that's why narratives and media have a responsibility. And
Because there is history, Danielle. There is history.
no,
Los
but
Angeles-
what was the first thing I said? There was cause for unity for us to all stand behind something we could agree on. But when you take something and skew it and you vilify, you've lost half your audience.
But as Danielle, but I think I'll just say, once again, I'm no expert in this, but just from the watching, the history of the statistics are small. There's no doubt very few people have been killed. Black people have been killed by police. It's a small number, but it's a constant number. And there is outcry, and it's incredibly rare for the police to get found guilty of anything. And usually there's cause, sometimes there's not, but there's been that growing outrage, not on a one time, but over lots of times. So, and it's hard to ignore. It's hard to say, hey, this one time people should have gathered, when there was probably 7 incidents last year that they're sensationalized, as Mark said, because they sell papers, they sell airwaves, they bring up division, and they get people emotionally attached. So they have an energy, but they're not, it's not an isolated, it's not the 9/11 where it was the one time that will bring everybody together. It really was another straw on that camel's back.
Yes, I hear that. And I think it got the country's attention. I just felt it could have been handled in a lot better of a way than it was.
One of the things we're forgetting is that there's a very easy way to clean up the police department, and that is internal affairs. Don't have cops watching cops.
Correct.
Internal affairs, and take it out of the hands of the police, because having the fox guard the chicken coop just doesn't work.
That's right.
No.
This doesn't work.
And we can agree on that. Yeah.
That's what needs to happen. Until they do that, there are let me get this right. I don't want to make a mistake. There are approximately 40,000 shootings in the United States a year. 29,000 of them are suicides. 8,836 were gang-related violence, and 1,600 were cop shootings of white, black, Hispanic. Okay? That encompasses almost 40,000 shootings a year. We have a 30,000 suicide problem a year.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
1,612 people were shot. Change internal affairs, get it outside the hands of the police, put it into an outside agency somewhere, I'm not sure who yet, and let's fix the suicide problem. And the 800, almost 10,000 shootings in the streets, most of those are illegal guns anyway. But let's get rid of the internal affairs. That will go a long way to solving the problem.
Did you
I'll
know?
also say the unions.
Did you know that the CDC cannot mention the word gun violence and suicide?
Yes.
of the NRA.
Mhm.
Cannot mention. They call it violent
Violent suicide.
suicide.
Correct.
They cannot say handgun. They cannot say pistol. Just wanted to throw that in.
Suicide.
Yeah.
It's a mental health problem.
And despite me being on the left, unions are an issue.
For the police, they sure are.
Oh,
That's the other thing. I have a friend of mine who's a lawyer in LA for police. In fact, he was the one, and I'm not going to mention his name, who got the police off for Rodney King.
Oh my goodness.
Okay?
Mhm.
And he'll tell you point blank, you can't fire a union cop. It's almost impossible.
Possible.
And you know who pays for their defense?
We do.
The union.
That's
Right.
And I have that from one of the biggest lawyers in LA.
Mhm.
That's how
another
you
thing
clean
we
it up.
can agree on right now.
Yeah.
Unions can be a problem. So let's put the energy where it needs to go,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah, and there's things that can be done around police reform. I think one of the biggest, and again, a lot of the times the police are operating within the written laws, the legal parameters that they're given. I think one of the things that need to go away across the country are these no-knock warrants. And there have been several instances of anybody getting shot going in a no-knock warrant. There was one in Chesapeake, I think, Danielle, when you were still living here, of a guy on a marijuana charge that they did a no-knock warrant at 4 o'clock in the morning. And the guy thought he was getting broken into, and he got his gun and they shot him
Kill them.
and killed him
Wow.
in front of his family. And it was, why didn't they wait until the guy just went to work? Why did they have to bust into his house in the middle of the night to serve a warrant?
I'll give you the same answer I would say about the media, because there's really nothing to stop them. The
Exactly.
union protects them,
Mhm.
and of course, internal affairs protects them.
Mhm.
And,
And-
it's
And legally, they're allowed to do that. And so
Yeah.
it's a simple change the law.
Yeah,
they're
but
not allowed to do that.
we don't have to make everything a race issue. This is something
No.
that I agree that no American, regardless of race, should have to experience if we can rectify it or or modify it, reform it.
Race thing.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that goes beyond Democrat, Republican, Libertarian. It goes that it could really happen to any of us. Remember,
Yeah.
14 or 15 or 18 Black people that we shot that were famous, but there's 1,612 people shot last year by the cops.
Yes.
And Paul Rand, I think, is trying to get rid of that no-knock thing.
Yes. It started with the Breonna Taylor case.
That's right.
Yeah.
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 Now, why hasn't any of our great politicians figured this out if we can sit here and figure it out?
Well, our politicians need term limits.
Yes, they
Yeah.
do.
Nah,
Yes.
We need all these bozos out.
Out.
Yeah,
but
30
but-
years, 40
but
years.
Who they work for.
I'm against I'm against being against term limits. I think I'm not for term limits on the sense that we still vote. If we want them out, we vote them out.
But the power of incumbency is so powerful,
That's right.
you know, downplay it.
Right, but if you make term limits, then the inner workings, the staffs control the power, and because it takes time to learn the ins and outs. So I mean, I always look at it going, if you're a good candidate, you should be able to win.
I have to ask you a question. Is there any two-term president that you would have in your lifetime voted for a third term?
Maybe
Yeah.
Reagan, but he was losing his mind.
There is that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Is there anyone that you would say you'd want a third term out of?
no.
I would have taken Obama over the Clinton Trump choices.
Okay, I could buy that.
Okay. That will be next week.
So you've picked one person in all the time you've been on the planet in presidents.
Mhm.
That in itself makes for a good case for term limits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't, because there wouldn't have been anybody you would have picked. I mean, I think it makes the other point that if there's nobody you would want more than twice, why would you have to make a limit because you wouldn't vote for them?
Because so what happens is, so I lived in the DC area my whole life, grew up there, was very involved in, my parents were, I saw what happened. They were delegates, as I said. What happens is they get power, and they get money behind that power, and that money pays for the elections. That money buys the elections because they're invested, and they're a part of, they're kind of sunken into that position or whatever. And so it really isn't an election. It's really not a free election.
Well, that's the question: is the election, is it the power of the incumbency, or is it Citizen United? And to change the,
It's the power of PAC money.
That's right.
Yes.
power of what?
PAC money.
That's right.
Right, but
Actually,
Yeah, which is Citizen
But if you
United.
could remove, but shouldn't I would say we should be trying to limit that, or remove that, or take the money, get some of the money out of the elections. As much as we could, if that's the route, go for the route.
Now, I'm a firm believer that the politician should be a public servant.
Right.
This should not be a career choice.
Right. Exactly.
You should serve for a certain amount of time because you want to serve, not because you're in a position for power
Right.
and money.
Then you owe favors and then it gets corrupt.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well,
So
how do
guys,
we make
yeah,
sure that
it's,
they have a limit?
it's kind of headache. We're at the top of the hour. And I think because I want to be able to have people understand that a lot can be packed in an hour, I think I'm going to keep it to an hour. But before we go, there's a few questions I want to address. We are not all in agreement, but there's a lot of things we agreed on that I just want to point out. We agree that the media has agendas, that they are not representing the American people's best interests in terms of informing and unifying. We agree that unions are a problem. We agree that I don't know if we all agree on this. I'd like to see what Iman and David think, but that many of the issues that we're dealing with today are not necessarily race issues, but might be class issues. And we need to go to the source to help everyone have the opportunities they need to succeed. It's an American thing. Okay. What did everybody feel about this format? Would you guys come back again? Would you guys be comfortable doing this? Zoom has an option where you can do this as we're doing it. It can also be live on Facebook. So we can kind of get some comments from people who watch and expand the conversation. Like I said, I think real dialogue like this is the grassroots we need. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. If we could go live.
Okay, so you'd be comfortable? Okay, great.
I would have to think about that going live, but not that I care that people hear my opinion. I'm worried about what happens when they hear my opinion.
Well,
in this day and age.
Yeah.
And I have an 8-year-old daughter. I have kids from 8 to 30. I don't know what the hell I was thinking.
I would say,
yeah, I know, Mark, it is a real concern for people who are come from conservative perspectives today. I could say you could change your name. I mean, you're saying someone might recognize you, so you're afraid that there could be some backlash.
I'm just saying that's something we all have to think about.
I know.
I'm okay.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. I'm okay too. I'm already out, so there's no going back.
It's very easy to get a CCW license, so I don't have to worry.
Okay. Yeah. Because I'd love to, Mark, I want you every week. I want all of you every week. If you guys are willing to come back, I think there's so much more to talk about. I think
Nobody wants to throw me out of the group. I don't know what my term limit is in the group, but
right. Well, if we want to talk about term limits, let's talk about Bibi in Israel. I'm sure we all have opinions about that. But David, what were your thoughts of how the session went?
good. I would just say going forward, it'd be nice to kind of plan an agenda.
Yes.
Point so that we could be a little bit more prepared. And then the same thing I'd say kind of Facebook Live. I don't know. I think there'd be value of bringing a panelist or a specialist on a topic where we could then discuss or bring up points on that topic opposed to a more free-for-all.
Okay. Okay.
Also, how about do some homework? Like if we would,
Yeah, I was thinking to have topics announced in advance so people can come with their research, come with their information, and we can all like contribute together.
because I am sure you will change your mind about the class struggle if you study Reconstruction.
I guess my point is, two things can be true at once, as Ben Shapiro says. It's not my right way, my wrong way. My perspective is right, your perspective is flawed. We can look at the history and acknowledge it happened, but still have a different response to it today. And that's really important to receive.
Totally agree with that.
Totally agree.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. All right, guys. So
907.
yes, well, I think we did great. I think we got a lot in there. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming and being open. And this is like a beta call to see what's going to work and how it can be helpful to people. I think a lot of us are speaking for so many other Americans who feel the same way. And it's great to have a dialogue with each other because, again, we are Americans first. And when we can relate to each other as human beings again, we have a chance at making our country strong again. So, heart.
David, let's play
Okay,
some
guys.
tennis.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure.
I played last week.
What's that?
Iman, I don't know if you know, I moved up to Washington.
Oh, you did?
Oh, you left California. What a surprise. Okay. Okay.
Not for the reasons you would think.
Oh, well, okay. Well, we have more. There's plenty more there where that came from. But according to Newsom, stay-at-home orders have been lifted right after the inauguration. But okay, we'll talk about that next week. Okay, guys. God bless.
Thank you for listening to America's Voices. If you'd like to join into the conversation and not miss a future episode, visit daniellabloom.com/America's Voices. God bless you and God bless America.